to approach. According to human rights organizations, during the month of March, Israeli soldiers and settlers carried out nearly 2,000 separate attacks against Palestinians across the occupied West Bank. The UN says this is not haphazard. There was a pattern of complicity between the Israeli army and settlers aimed at displacing Palestinians and creating ethnic cleansing in the occupied territory. 36,000 Palestinians in 1 year displaced by settler violence alone. Driving on the road in the occupied West Bank, Palestinians don't just brave delays and danger, they also bear witness to how fast their land and horizon are shrinking. Noor Aoudi, Al Jazeera, on the road to Nablus, Palestine.
All right, let's take a look at some of the other major stories from around the world, because it's been 3 years since the war in Sudan began, a conflict that has created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 34 million people, that's almost 2 out of every 3, now need humanitarian support. Since the war started, around 14 million people have been displaced from their homes, and an estimated 19 million school-aged children without access to education. Nearly 70% of hospitals and health facilities in conflict areas are no longer functioning, and estimates suggest the war may have killed 150,000 people plus. Now, millions of displaced people are facing severe hunger, meaning community kitchens have now become a vital lifeline. Hiba Morgan reports from Omdurman in Khartoum state.
Community kitchens in Sudan, known as tekayas, have been a lifeline to millions of Sudanese who have been affected by the fighting between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces and have been struggling to find meals to be able to survive. Now, those tekayas provide food for those in need and in many cases are the only source of food for millions and millions of Sudanese. This tekaya in Al-No Hospital in Omdurman, in the Sudanese capital Khartoum, provides meals to patients inside the hospital, but also to hundreds of others who live nearby and who struggle to find meals on a daily basis. But community kitchens, despite their significance and their roles as lifeline to many people, are facing challenges in operating. According to Islamic Relief, more than 40% of community kitchens have been forced to close down in the past 6 months because of soaring prices of food commodities, making it very hard for such kitchens to be able to deliver food to those in need.
In the beginning, we used to make 3 meals a day. Because of the soaring prices and because of little support, we now make only 1 meal, and sometimes 3 or 4 days can go by without a meal at all.
The challenges facing community kitchens come at a time when millions of Sudanese are facing severe food shortages and in some parts of the country facing outright famine. Aid organizations say unless donors meet their pledges and promises to fund programs and to fund community kitchens such as this one, then millions of Sudanese will be facing hunger and could die in the coming weeks and months due to food shortages and lack of meals. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Omdurman, Khartoum.
Well, Germany is hosting an international conference to raise funds to help those affected by the war in Sudan, as Dominic Kane reports from Berlin.
In calling this conference, the German hosts are hoping very much to focus the world's attention on the situation in Sudan. Many key international partners are taking part in this, as are representatives of Sudanese civil society, but crucially, the Rapid Support Force and the government. Those two warring sides are not invited here. The Sudanese government has complained vociferously about this conference, saying shouldn't be taking place, it's not helping the situation. The question is, this is the 3rd time in 3 years that a leading European country has called such a conference. There was a conference in Paris, there was a conference in London. It didn't bring about an end to the violence. What chance is there that it can happen after this conference? We shall wait to see. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says it's critical for the international community to refocus its attention on Sudan and work towards bringing an end to the crisis.
It's extremely important that the attention of the international community is back on Sudan, on this horrific situation. We have just heard the reports. From a human rights perspective, what we have seen over the last 3 years is absolutely horrendous. War crimes, crimes against humanity, people being raped, civilians being killed, civilian infrastructure destroyed. So there is a need for the international community to come together to send a very clear signal to both the RSF and the SAF to stop this horrible war and to get back to the negotiation table and to find a way to transition to civilian rule. That's extremely important, and I hope that the Berlin conference will galvanize the energy around that. It's clear that Sudan has been a forgotten crisis for much too long. As a result, a conference like this, where we expect that significant pledges will be made precisely to respond to the 14 million displaced, to the 21 million who are in food insecurity, to the 10 million children that are out of school, is going to be absolutely critical. So I hope that at the end of the day, we will see very concrete pledges. We will also see very concrete commitments to put an end to this war.
The US is expanding its strategic presence in Asia as part of its efforts to counter China. Efforts are underway to strengthen defence cooperation with long-standing allies like the Philippines, and that includes plans to establish a new military base near disputed waters in the South China Sea. Jamila Alindogan reports from Balabac Islands.
At the western edge of the Philippines, the Balabac Islands seem like the end of the map. They have been known mainly for bright reefs and pristine coastlines. But these islands aren't defined only by their natural features. They are now a strategic military frontier. The islands sit at a junction linking the South China Sea to the wider Pacific. It's a route for international vessels, including Chinese warships, which have been spotted more frequently in recent years. For decades, control of these waters has been limited. So for the Philippine military, presence has become critical. Under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, Balabac has been identified as a new military base location with rotational U.S. presence. That may mean more American troops.
Our capabilities, number one, are defensive in nature. Number two, it's not directed against any particular country. It is designed to protect and to secure what is rightfully and legally ours.
So there are more patrols now. The Philippines' shift from fighting internal conflicts to bolstering its security against external threats is well underway. And nowhere is it more evident than here in Balabac, where large-scale military facilities are being built across these remote islands. A message to Beijing that Manila is prepared to defend itself if necessary. For residents, there is measured optimism.
Better security is important because our own defense is limited. U.S. support can help with security and terrorism, and it can also protect our tourism industry. For as long as it does not lead to war, we don't want war, since civilians suffer most.
From a people with a long history of being caught up in global tensions, their message to the government is clear. The interests of the Philippines must come first. Decisions made far away are felt most by those who call these islands home. Jamila Alindogan, Al Jazeera, Balabac, Palawan, Western Philippines.
A new trial is being held into the death of Argentinian football star Diego Maradona, a year after a scandal involving a judge caused the first legal case to collapse. Teresa Bo reports from Buenos Aires.
Diego Maradona was a symbol of Argentina. He was 60 years old and recovering from brain surgery at home when he passed away nearly 6 years ago. The medical team in charge of caring for him is standing trial on charges of homicide.
Prosecutors say Maradona received inadequate medical care during the days prior to his death, including that his home care was insufficient for his condition and that all warning signs were ignored about his health.
His neurosurgeons, psychiatrists and nurses are among the accused. The case against them is based on a series of audio clips released by local media. Prosecutors say the medical team isolated Maradona from his family, who wanted to hospitalize him to keep profiting. Beatriz Céspedes came to the courthouse in Buenos Aires to demand justice.
Diego was a feeling, it was endless love. It is what I feel. I think it's important to be here so he can rest in peace.
The medical board that examined Maradona's case found the football star showed, quote, unmistakable signs of prolonged agony. His name generates the same media frenzy in death as it did in life.
The original trial started last year, but it was suspended after one of the judges allowed an illegal camera inside the courtroom to film an unauthorized documentary. She was banned from the Argentinian judiciary for life.
For many, the trial is about closure. Argentinians want to know how one of the country's greatest sports stars was treated at the end of his life. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Pope Leo has concluded a historic visit to Algeria, the first by a pontiff to the North African country. The Pope visited the Great Mosque of Algiers in a symbolic gesture promoting Muslim-Christian dialogue. He later travelled to the city of Annaba, where he celebrated Mass at the Basilica of St. Augustine. And the pontiff is now heading to Cameroon before continuing to Angola and Equatorial Guinea. That's according to the Vatican, where it also says that more than 20% of the world's Catholics live in Africa. Nicholas Huck reports for us from Yaoundé.
On a hilltop chapel on the outskirts of Cameroon's capital, Brother Jean-Pierre has found his voice in the Catholic Church. An African missionary priest heading to the United States. A land of immigrants, he says, now divided, in need of peace and healing during the Iran war.
We've said so many prayers for the war to end, and yet it feels like it doesn't stop. As a seminarian, a future priest, I'm left with the same question, the question so many are asking. In my faith as a Christian, I don't have the answer. I'm not in God's place, but I'm called to patience.
He's a student of the Theological School of St. Cyprian, where a new generation of priests are being trained. 200 students from across the world gather here. Today's lesson, pastoral visits, reaching out to those too often ignored.
We have to visit the sick, the vulnerable and the poor, and that's where God is found. The future of our church depends on it, to go out and meet people.
Among them, a former Haitian footballer, a Filipino who worked at McDonald's, and Brother Johannes, the son of a fisherman from Jakarta, answering a calling fewer young Europeans are choosing.
I have a job. It means I have a salary. I have a girlfriend. I have my family. I have many friends who love me, right? But I always feel something's not complete in my life.
Brother Johannes found a sense of fulfillment in Africa. The school's principal believes the future of the church is on the continent, and the numbers back him up. Africa now accounts for nearly a third of the world's Catholics. Here, seminaries are filling up. In Europe, churches are emptying.
Europe is in crisis, but crisis can bring renewal. Maybe now is Africa's time to carry the faith and take it back to Europe.
Pope Leo, the American pastor to the world, arriving in Africa, to a continent he once came to evangelize, to one now shaping the message. And it begins with Brother Jean-Pierre, an African priest praying for Americans to find peace, on a mission to rebuild the Catholic Church in its image. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Yaoundé.
That's your latest update from me, Sarah Khairat. Our coverage continues here on Al Jazeera on the US-Israeli war on Iran.
This whole peace process is a very clear indicator of the more multipolar, more westless world that we live in.
There are lots of cases of breaking their promises even before the negotiations.
It is in the interest of the Israelis to continue the fight, whereas it is the interest of the United States to end the hostilities.
Iran has been decimated. They don't want to go back to one day before the bombing started.
President Trump doesn't like to bluff. He likes to be very direct with his negotiations.
He wants to say, well, I'm actually a deal maker, not a war maker, and my pressure tactic worked.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
In what ways does this war on Iran reflect a belief in the concept of the Greater Israel?
Tackling the big issues on Al Jazeera.
Up stakes right now. It would take them 20 years to rebuild that country.
US President Donald Trump says the war is close to being over and that another round of talks is likely. The US military says that it's successfully enforced a blockade on Iran's ports. Iran says that 2 of its vessels were able to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Lebanon calls its first direct talks with Israel productive as the Israeli military continues to attack the south. Also ahead this hour, at least 4 people are killed in a school shooting in southern Turkey. Students jumped through windows to save their lives. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying to end the US-Israeli war with Iran. Negotiations are expected to continue within the next few days. Iran has confirmed that communications are ongoing between Iran and the US through Pakistani mediation, following last week's talks in Islamabad. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baqai says that Tehran is committed to ending the conflict through diplomacy and dialogue. Earlier, US President Donald Trump said the war is very close to being over and that negotiations could resume within the next 2 days.
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
The diplomatic push comes amid heightened tension in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's army has warned that it will block trade through the Red Sea as well as the Gulf and the Sea of Oman if the US naval blockade on Iranian ports continues. The US military says that it had effectively halted maritime trade to and from Iran, but Tehran says that 2 of its tankers were able to cross the strait. Washington hasn't specified the exact maritime boundaries of the blockade, making verification difficult. We are live this hour with our correspondents in Riyadh, in Washington, D.C., Islamabad and Tehran, where we join Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim. So, Ali, what are Iranian officials saying about the prospect of another round of talks?
Well, Adrian, yesterday I was in touch with one of the very senior Iranian officials regarding the talks. He told me that there have been nothing till the moment set for a next meeting. However, Islamabad could be the next venue. Today we heard from Ismail Baqai, the spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry, that there have been exchange of messages and there is an a Pakistani delegation that's supposed to come to Tehran to discuss some issues regarding the mediations and to put kind of final points in this regard. But till the moment, there's nothing that have arrived. There's nothing that have come into a shape. What we're hearing is just in media for the moment. Now, what we know is that there are issues that are on the table, and Iranians and the Americans are possibly going to be discussing, it's already known, enriching uranium and the limits, plus the highly enriched uranium stockpile inside Iran in one of the destroyed facilities. And of course, the epicenter of the whole crisis right now, the management of the Strait of Hormuz.
Ali, stay with us. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who's live for us in Islamabad. Kimberly, a Pakistan Foreign Ministry source has told Al Jazeera that it's again offered to host talks. So Pakistan determined, it seems, to get the parties back around the table.
And I can tell you, being here on the ground in Islamabad, security is extremely tight. And in fact, we're just a little bit away from the parliament, and security continued to push us back to this point because they are proceeding and acting like the talks are imminent. That's also exactly what multiple officials from the Pakistani government have told Al Jazeera, that these talks are being prepared and could happen at any time in the next few days, of something that, of course, has been backed up by U.S. President Donald Trump. And what we know all along is, since the principal players in the delegation left Islamabad on Sunday, the working groups underneath, the subject matter experts, the technical experts, they have continued to exchange messages back and forth, and that has been backed up on both the U.S. as well as the Iranian side. So what we expect is that these talks are imminent, but there's been no public schedule just yet. We know that Donald Trump himself does favor this location, and we also know that there is an urgency to this, given the fact that the ceasefire is set to run out on April 21st. And so as a result, what these teams have been doing, we're told, is working frantically to try and find some points of intersection between the two sides so that this can be extended, or at least there can be a framework put in place to allow for productive round two talks and discussions.
Kimberly, I'll be back with you in just a moment. The U.S. military says that a blockade of Iranian ports has been fully implemented. It says that 6 merchant vessels followed orders to turn around. However, CENTCOM hasn't said where the maritime boundary of the blockade begins, making independent verification difficult. Let's go back to Ali Hashim in Tehran. We know the U.S. blockade is in place right now. Whether it's working or not, Ali, is hard to tell. What is Iran saying?
Well, the Iranians are saying that there are some ships passing, or some vessels passing, but the main rhetoric we had from Tehran came from the spokesperson of the armed forces, who said if this blockade is going to continue this way, Iran is going to block 3 passages, the Strait of Hormuz, the Sea of Oman, and the Red Sea. Now, this is coming into the equation. Now, we knew that Iran has leverage in the Red Sea through the Houthis, their allies there, but this is the first time that the Iranians are mentioning this openly. We had the Supreme Leader mentioning the Houthis in one of his speeches, but today this is a clear threat. And then the closure of Bab el-Mandab on the Red Sea would mean more and more suffocation for the global economy. And this could actually play once again into the hands of the Iranians, who are exerting a lot of efforts to internationalize or globalize this crisis.
Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim reporting live from Tehran. Ali, many thanks indeed. Let's get back to Kimberly in Islamabad. Kimberly, the Pakistani Prime Minister is heading to the Middle East. Many countries, of course, throughout the Gulf region, hugely affected by this war that's been right on their doorstep.
Right, and this is not a ceremonial tour. This is crisis diplomacy. What we know Shehbaz Sharif is working on is speaking with each of the governments and kingdoms to essentially get all of them on the same page and core up or lock in support for round two. What is expected to happen, and we know he has now landed in Saudi Arabia, next we'll go to Qatar and then to Turkey, is to coordinate the positions so that they're all aligned and that there isn't, given that all of these countries have relationships with the United States and Tehran, to make sure that there is no crisscrossing of diplomacy ahead of what could be critical, pivotal round two talks, and also to ensure that if there is a framework that is ultimately secured, that there can then be the leverage of these countries to try and ensure that it stays in place, given the fragility of the ceasefire.
Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett reporting live from Islamabad. Kimberly, many thanks indeed. Let's take you now to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. Al Jazeera's Rasul Sodar is there. Rasul, what are we expecting Gulf countries to convey to Pakistan's Prime Minister?
Well, Gulf countries have been the most affected countries because of this war. So nearly 8,000 projectiles have been targeted at them. And so as a result, they have paid a huge price. So that's why they want to play a central role here. And Pakistan having good ties with almost each of the GCC countries, but particularly here with Saudi Arabia is quite important. So GCC countries are not at the negotiating table. However, they are coordinating their efforts through Pakistani mediation. And that's why Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit is extremely critical for them, because they are going to first, make sure that the ceasefire is preserved, and then second, that their demands are properly communicated at the table to both Americans and Iranians. So here they have three critical demands. First, the Strait of Hormuz must remain open, and also there should not be any change in the status of the Strait of Hormuz, because practically for GCC countries, Iran particularly having a control over the Strait of Hormuz means having a control not economically on the GCC countries, but also it is seen as a threat to their sovereignty as well. Indeed, today we have seen a statement released by the GCC Secretary General, Jassim Mohammed al-Budaybi, saying that we affirm that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and secure international way, and any attempt to impose a new reality by force or use it as a tool or for political or economic pressure is unacceptable. So the second demand is Iranian proxies across the region. Many of the GCC countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they see Iran's proxies in Iraq as a threat. And then third, they're extremely concerned about Iranian missile program, because they have seen when the war is erupting, so they are the victims of these missiles. So they want this missile program also not to remain as a threat.
Yeah, we're a week into this 2-week ceasefire, and it goes without saying that Gulf countries are very keen to avoid any return to conflict.
Indeed, so here we have heard the statements after statements from Oman today, then from Qatar, then from Saudi Arabia, all of them saying that the priority is diplomacy and any armed conflict must be resolved at the negotiating table. And the reason for that, of course, there are quite concerns that in case of collapse of the ceasefire, this war cannot be contained. Perhaps it's going to be worse even than before. And second, so they have already suffered tremendously. So just here in Saudi Arabia, according to the Ministry of Energy, the monthly economic cost just on the oil sector is around $4 billion. Ras Tanura, Jubail, the eastern province, Yanbu city, and then in Qatar, Ras Laffan, the largest LNG facility in the world, then in the United Arab Emirates, so Habshan gas facilities, they all have been hit, and that is the largest in the United Arab Emirates. So as a result, on daily basis, the region is suffering from loss of billions of dollars, and also on the top of that, their reputation as safe harbors of the businesses at the stake. So in that sense, they're extremely concerned. That's why they're putting pressure on both sides and using their leverage to make sure that the ceasefire is preserved and also that this eventually leads to a peace settlement that is fair for all sides.
Al Jazeera's Rasul Sardar reporting live from Riyadh. Many thanks, Rasul. We're going to break away from the latest developments in the ceasefire in the war between the US, Iran and Israel now to bring you major breaking news from Turkey, where at least 4 people have been killed in a shooting at a secondary school. Police say that a teacher is among the victims and that the suspected gunman is also dead. The attack comes just a day after 16 people were injured in a separate school shooting in eastern Turkey. Let's go live now to Istanbul. Al Jazeera's Sinem Kosioglu is there for us. Sinem, what more do we know?
Well, we know that, as you have mentioned, the attacker was a 13-year-old teenager who entered in the school immediately and started shooting with 5 guns that he took from his retired police officer father's inventory. The teenage had 5 guns and 7 magazines when he entered and started shooting inside the school. He entered 2 classrooms and, as you have mentioned as well, he was shot by himself. According to the city's governor, Kahramanmaraş governor, it's not clear whether he committed suicide. He killed himself on purpose, like what happened yesterday. During yesterday's attack, the perpetrator, the 16-year-old teenager, killed himself after shooting around that school. But there are suspicions that this might have happened by accident during all these chaos. Among 4 people killed is 1 school teacher, the others are students, and 20 people are injured. Some of them are severely injured. They're being treated at the hospital. And now there's an investigation underway because this is a second incident in a row within the last 48 hours. And the authorities announced a broadcast ban inside the country. And they advise media to share information carefully. But of course, now we have so many questions waiting around. How did this young boy, this teenage boy, access his father's guns? Are they going to improve the gun controls, even though it is already very strict in Turkey? So we're waiting for more to hear about the details. But for now, it doesn't seem like a terror incident. It seems like more of a teenage mental health problem, according to what is being circulated on the media. But of course, details remain to be assessed.
All right, Sinem, thanks for that. Al Jazeera's Sinem Kosioglu, live in Istanbul. Let's return to developments in the US-Israel war on Iran. As we mentioned earlier, the US military says the blockade of Iranian ports has been fully implemented. Now, this live map shows a handful of oil tankers marked as red icons and cargo ships, the ones in green, currently in and near the waterway. Arrows indicate that the vessels are moving. Dots show those that are stationary. Hundreds of vessels remain stuck, concerned by threats of attack. The US military says that it's working to support freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz from non-Iranian ports. Our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Alan, is President Trump sending mixed messages about what's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, certainly there were mixed messages because Donald Trump initially said that there would be a blockade of the strait. CENTCOM, who conduct the military operations in the area, later refined that and said it's only on Iranian ports. Now, we've seen from marine trackers that a couple of ships have actually managed to get out of Iranian ports. That's because this is a big area to police. And remember, although there's 10,000 airmen, Marines and sailors involved in this operation, at least a dozen boats, at least a dozen aircraft, it's still a big area to patrol. Now, the United States said that they expected to have other countries participating. Donald Trump said we would get details of that on Monday. There's still no details of that from the White House. But it's clear that what they're intending to do is to blockade Iran. So when we talk about a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, it's really a blockade of Iranian ports. So mixed messages just in the imprecise nature of Donald Trump's social media post, but it's clear what the United States are trying to do. They're trying to choke Iran off from world markets, from getting money for their energy supplies, and stopping other countries using Iranian ports, which they hope will eventually put pressure on the Iranians. Particularly, they're hoping the Chinese, who get a third of their oil from Iran, will put pressure on Iran to get to the negotiating table.
It's approaching 9:20 in the morning there in Washington. The president is up and posting on social media, as you say. Yeah, on Truth Social in the last hour, he's posted about Iran. What's exactly has he had to say?
Well, he's exchanged letters with Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader. He said that in an interview that he gave to the friendly Fox Business channel on Monday. If we put the Truth Social post up on screen, you can see exactly what he has been writing. He says, China is very happy that I'm permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm doing it for them also and the world. This situation will never happen again. They have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. We're working together smartly and very well. Doesn't that beat fighting? But remember, in caps, we are very good at fighting if we have to, far better than anyone else. A couple of things in that. Donald Trump says often that the United States doesn't need the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you're talking about oil supplies, it probably doesn't, but it does need things like fertilizer and aluminium. They have to come through the strait. He says that China has said it won't sell weapons to Iran. That's because there's been reporting that China is about to send new missile defense and air defense systems to Iran. Donald Trump said in an interview he gave this morning to a friendly TV station that he'd spoken to Xi Jinping and he had essentially said that he wasn't sending weapons. And so Donald Trump sees this as an important step. Remember, the two leaders are due to meet in Beijing in the middle of May. That will be an important meeting. Clearly, the clearly the Chinese have made their point that they want to see an end to the conflict. Donald Trump, in an interview on Monday evening, said we're getting very close to that point, perhaps within the next couple of days.
Our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, reporting live from the White House. Alan, many thanks indeed. Joining me in the studio, Ahmed Halal, who is the managing director for the GCC at the Asia Group. That's a policy consultancy firm based in Washington, D.C. He's also an economic and political risk analyst. And Lorenzo Carmel, a professor of history or of the history of international relations at the University of Turin, specialising in the Middle East and North Africa. He's live with us in Turin. Let's start with you, Lorenzo. Trump says that this war is now very close to ending. Is that, do you think, genuine confidence based on concrete evidence that negotiations are progressing, or bluster?
Most likely is also the fact that Trump is aware that this war cannot be won, and the census funding is searching for an alternative. I want to remind you that Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada in retaliation for the humiliation withdrawal at the time. After that, there was a bombing barracks in Beirut in 1983. And in the last few hours, we know that Pentagon personnel and other U.S. governmental agencies have been secretly instructed by the Trump administration to intensify preparations for a potential military operation against Cuba. And this tells us that it could be that it's trying a way out, and Cuba or other could be somehow some tools to that in that direction. Then, of course, we know that it's imposing also a counter blockade to a blockade. But the problem is that instead of somehow opening a strait, the Strait of Hormuz, is risking the closure of a second strait, that is Bab el-Mandeb, that connects, as we know, the Red Sea with the Indian Ocean. And of course, that is particularly critical for Saudi Arabia, but not only for Saudi Arabia. We know that about 12% of the world trade oil passed through that. So in that sense, the high risk now is that both straits will be closed as a consequence also of some of the policies that Trump is imposing in the region.
So, Ahmed, while Trump is talking up the continuation of peace talks, as Lorenzo was saying, the US is tightening maritime pressure, turning ships back from Iranian ports. What's going on here? We've got diplomacy and escalation going on at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. And a naval blockade of this kind is definitely an escalation. It's technically an act of war, and Trump is trying to achieve economic strangulation of Iran. Its only economic lifeline is the oil exports that have been leaving from Karg Island and the other energy infrastructure that they have. So he's trying to achieve what he hasn't been able to through bombardment to bring the Iranian regime to its knees. The fact of the matter is that Iran has a much greater tolerance for pain than the U.S. has estimated. They have developed over decades a fortress economy. They've been under sanctions for decades, and they've been able to continue exporting even during the maximum pressure campaign. But this is intended to really starve the economy of any remaining, the trickle of hard currency revenue that they were achieving of about $170 million a day.
And if what Lorenzo says turns out to be correct, if with Iran warning that it may widen maritime retaliation beyond Hormuz, if this U.S. blockade continues, how dangerous is that threat?
Well, it's extremely dangerous because Hormuz handles about 20% in peacetime, 20% of natural gas, LNG and oil transit for the global economy. And an equally important transit point and waterway is the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandab, which the Houthis are able to destabilize and block relatively inexpensively. So you would find a compounded shock to global energy markets, and you're going to go from what is now a price shock to a very, very real supply and physical shock.
Lorenzo, if both sides are still applying pressure, are we seeing genuine negotiations? Are we likely to see genuine negotiations if they get back around the table, or simply bargaining through coercion?
Yes, first of all, let's keep into account the fact that, of course, this war is not the same for all actors. There are some actors that somehow they're waging this war and they perceive it as an existential war. So it's existential for their, really, how they organize their state. This applies to Iran, but to a large extent it applies also to Israel, to a non-state actor like Hezbollah. For the US, of course, this is not an existential war, and this makes a huge difference. That said, if and when the negotiation will resume in earnest, I think that Iran will put much less on the table and demand much more than the JCPOA in 2015. So, and going back to history, but also much more than what would have been the case just a few months ago. So Iran, to a large extent, preferred escalation, betting largely on Hormuz and what is succeeded to this regime.
Lorenzo, what does history teach us about whether diplomacy can succeed if both sides are still actively escalating leverage?
Yes, first of all, it is to tell us that you need always bargaining chip. So in the sense, you need to have some tools to end a war. So for instance, without this war, Iran would not be able to establish a unilateral control over Hormuz, which is more effective than any possible weapon. So in this sense, teach us that if you have something like this leverage, there are high chances that you find a way out. For instance, Lebanon, that we are not covering, but Lebanon on the other hand has not any bargaining power with Israel. The paradox is the only bargaining power is related to Hezbollah. So in this sense, if you don't have a bargaining chip, in that sense, you don't have a way out. While in the case of Iran, with all the problems that are there, it seems that there is the possibility in that sense to find a way out.
Ahmed, oil markets remain under pressure despite this talk of peace. Are investors signaling that they don't believe that this crisis is, as the president says, close to a resolution?
I think Brent crude, the international benchmark, is trading at around $96, and I think that's an indication for me that markets are incredibly complacent. We're not in a price shock anymore. There are no more cargoes floating in the ocean from the Persian Gulf. Those have ceased. There's no oil and gas. There's no chemical. There's no products, refined products leaving the Gulf. There is now a physical supply disruption. So as this drags on, the duration of the blockade reaches the end of April, let's say, you're going to see oil prices go to $150 a barrel, potentially with massive massive ramifications for economies in Asia, first and foremost, but then migrating to Europe and the US.
You say massive implications. What are we talking about here? What will be the broader economic effects? What impact is it likely to have, apart from the price of gas going up, for the likes of consumers like you and I?
Well, we're already feeling it. If you are today filling your car with petrol or gasoline, as Americans call it, you're talking about $4 a gallon. In Asia, Asia has borne the brunt of this crisis in the first 4 weeks of the war. You've got national energy emergencies declared in countries like the Philippines. You've got workers forced to not show up for work, and schools and universities ceasing to operate, and rationing and subsidies. So that's all happening. And you have to remember that Hormuz isn't just an energy corridor, it's a multi-commodity industrial corridor, because you've got naphtha, and you've got sulfur, you've got urea, you've got all of, and you talk about food security, the main ingredient for fertilizer. This region accounts for 1/5 of urea exports. So you're talking about ramifications for the global food system as well. Not to mention diesel, which is the main transportation fuel, which is needed to bring commodities from one market to the next. In a big place like India, for example, that's going to cause consumers a lot of pain.
Lorenzo, do you believe that we're moving toward an actual settlement here, or simply continuing along towards a more fragile, militarized standoff that's disguised as dressed up as diplomacy?
Yes, first we need to always take into account that there is not a military solution to a political problem. And this applies to Iran, to Palestine, to Lebanon. So those that think somehow to manage the situation through military force, of course, will fail. So first of all, as a historian, I want to remind you, just to remind everyone, that every popular movement in the Middle East that has called for a form of parliamentary democracy from the end of the 19th century up to the present was largely curtailed by Western powers. So in this sense, despite the appearances, many of these regimes are quite useful for Western powers. And sometimes extremist regimes are even more useful because they somehow provide stability. And stability is needed, especially for Western powers, to carry on with their interests. Let me say that in that sense, certainly a freezing of this conflict or something like that is more feasible than an actual political solution, because despite the appearances, many actors, they are not very much interested about that. Let me just add one very last point, because it seems to me that no one was mentioning Azerbaijan. Why I say Azerbaijan? Because Azerbaijan is a neighboring country of Iran and provides 50% of the oil needs of Israel. So we should ask also, wonder ourselves why Iran is not attacking Azerbaijan. And the answer is that because from Azerbaijan there are not attacks on Iranian soil. They're not trying to destroy schools, hospitals, bridges, and so on. So I was hearing your correspondent from Saudi Arabia. We know that many attacks that Iran received were coming from other countries in the Persian Gulf. So in this respect, does not justify anything, but we can't ignore this fact.
Professor, many thanks indeed. Lorenzo Carmel there in Turin, and Ahmed Halal here in Doha. Many thanks indeed. It's good to have you with us. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. A reminder of the latest developments in the ceasefire talks between the US and Iran. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying to reach a permanent end to the US-Israeli war with Iran. Iran has confirmed that communications are ongoing with the US through Pakistani mediation following last week's talks in Islamabad. US President Donald Trump says the war is very close to being over. The latest diplomatic push follows heightened tension in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's army has warned that it will block trade through the Red Sea as well as the Gulf and Sea of Oman if the US naval blockade on Iranian ports continues. It comes after the American army said it's effectively halted maritime trade to and from Iran. And in other news, at least 4 people have been killed in a shooting at a school in Turkey. Police say that a teacher is among the victims and that the suspected gunman is also dead. The attack comes just a day after 16 people were injured in a separate school shooting in eastern Turkey. Lebanon and Israel have held their first direct talks in decades. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted their envoys in Washington. He called the meeting a historic milestone. The parties agreed to continue negotiations at a later date. Hezbollah has dismissed the talks, but Beirut says the aim is to end Israeli attacks. Israel says it will not consider a ceasefire unless the Lebanese government takes steps to disarm Hezbollah. And Israeli forces are still attacking Lebanon. Earlier, separate strikes hit 2 vehicles in the towns of Saadiyat and Aljazeera in Mount Lebanon. Another air raid targeted the town of Nabatia al-Fawqa in the south. Since the beginning of March, Israeli attacks on Lebanon have killed more than 2,000 people. More than 1.2 million others have been displaced. Al Jazeera's Zaina Hodda has more now from Beirut.
There is anger. We are in the southern suburbs of Beirut, neighborhoods really that have been repeatedly targeted in Israeli strikes in recent weeks. You can see the destruction, the damage for yourself, hundreds of buildings either damaged or destroyed, people's homes destroyed, their livelihoods. There are many shops here, so people, hundreds of thousands of people forced to leave their homes. So it is people here really who have been forced to bear the brunt of Israel's attacks. And if you talk to them and ask them how do they regard what happened in Washington yesterday, they simply say it's a declaration of war. It's a declaration of war against Hezbollah, and it's a declaration of war that just wasn't announced by the Israeli government, but by the Lebanese government as well. They point to statements by Israel's ambassador, who uses the word we, us, together, united. We will continue to get rid of the threat, and the threat is Hezbollah, and that they will liberate Lebanon from what they call Iran's occupation. So there is anger here. People believe the Lebanese government should not have sat down with Israel, the enemy, which has already killed more than 2,000 people in the past few weeks alone. And this is not a conflict that just happened a few weeks ago. And back in 2024, this area too was repeatedly hit. So people here say, why hasn't the ceasefire, the 2024 ceasefire, been implemented? What people want here is an end to the attacks. They want Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon. There is an invasion in the south of the country. They want the detainees. Israel holds detainees, Lebanese detainees. They want them to be released. They also want people to return to their homes. And this is why they believe that the Lebanese government does not have the leverage to impose its conditions on Israel. What they believe happened yesterday was an attempt by the United States and Israel to de-link the Iran and Lebanon fronts. So for them, this was all about weakening Iran and weakening Hezbollah. But this is only a slice of the picture in Lebanon, because this is a deeply divided country. People here, there are other people who welcome any attempt to bring about peace negotiations and end the war.
Hezbollah says that talks with Israel are unacceptable and risk deepening divisions in Lebanon.
Does the government not realise the danger of what it's undertaken? And does it understand that it's entered a wrong path that leads only to increasing the rift among the Lebanese? It has obtained nothing from the enemy except praise without achieving any demand. Shouldn't this government reconsider its calculations and abandon this course? We want a complete ceasefire. We don't want to return to the era before March 2nd of assassinations and attacks. We must enter a new phase. It's true that we are paying a price, but this price is paid to secure a safe and stable future. We want this aggression to cease in all its forms.
A week ago, Israel launched an intense wave of attacks across Lebanon, hitting more than 100 sites. The attacks came despite a ceasefire between the United States and Iran, which Israel said didn't extend to the conflict in Lebanon. Within minutes, at least 357 people died in the bombardment: men, women, and children. Among them was Hassan Ali Rizk, who had celebrated his first birthday just a week earlier. He was one of at least 30 children killed. So was 3-year-old Ahmed Hariri. He was killed alongside his brother Hadi and their mother Zainab. This is Khatoun Salma, a Lebanese poet known for writing about love and life. She and her husband, Mohammed Krisht, were killed. Earlier, we spoke to Dr. Tianmin Din, an emergency physician with Doctors Without Borders, working at the Jabal Amal Hospital near Tyre in southern Lebanon. She described what's been happening on the ground.
We are south of the Litani River, and what we are seeing here is essentially a daily bombardment on civilians, and we are seeing daily civilian casualties and injured. In the last 24 hours, we've had so many traumatic amputations that we've run out of arterial tourniquets. Last week, there was a day where civilians actually returned to their homes on the south thinking potentially it could have been safe, and within a few hours of having returned, there was a 7-year-old girl whose family was bombed. She was one of the lucky ones. There were 8 members of her family who are left buried underneath rubble. And these are things that essentially we're seeing on a daily basis. We are seeing traumatic brain injuries. We've had children whose bodies, whose intestines were riddled with shrapnel, just torn apart. In the same week, we've had children whose bowels were eviscerated, so their intestines were on the outside of their bodies. And often patients have a combination of all of the above injuries. And on top of their physical injuries, there's profound psychological trauma that comes with having your homes taken from you, being displaced, losing family members, and being injured. A few days ago, we had to console a boy who was orphaned by an airstrike. We need to ensure that supplies are able to get in. Every single bridge bar one has been bombed, and the supplies are actually afraid to come down to these hospitals now because they know it's not safe. And what I also think we need is for people to pay attention to what's going on, because what we are seeing daily here on the ground is this kind of normalization of a world where civilians can be bombed, civilians can be killed.
European Council President Antonio Costa says that the EU is calling for de-escalation and for a deal that allows for the full opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Since the beginning of this conflict, the European Union has been consistent in calling for the de-escalation and negotiations in full respect of international law. It is essential that all parties use the momentum created by the recent United States-Iran ceasefire brokered by Pakistan in order to address the concerns of the international community regarding Iran. That means nuclear program, of course, but also its ballistic missile.
Stations. The war in Iran has disrupted global energy supplies, with African countries in particular feeling the impact, as Catherine Soy reports now from Nairobi.
Here in Kenya, fuel prices went yesterday. That's when we saw this increase of fuel, but it's something that we expected since the crisis started. We saw, for example, some people holding and stocking up on fuel, expecting this particular time to happen. We also saw some petrol stations 2 weeks ago basically saying that they do not have fuel, saying that they were rationing fuel as well, but we're told that it was because they were holding this fuel. And it's not here in Nairobi. We are seeing similar problems in different parts of the country as well. Now, the government has been talking about it, and they say that it has enough fuel to last the country for the next couple of months or so, but people are quite worried. And like I said, it's not just in Kenya that we are witnessing this. You mentioned Mozambique, where we've seen these long queues. We have also been seeing such queues in Malawi. We've been talking to our stringer. He was supposed to film for us a fertilizer story, but he could not travel because there was no fuel for his car. And that was 2 days he's been waiting for that fuel. We're talking about Somalia as well, where fuel went up immediately the crisis started. So this is a problem that is affecting many countries.
In Iraq, the price of basic goods and food has doubled as land and sea trade routes across Iran become more dangerous to navigate. There's also a shortage of gas. Now, that's a byproduct of oil production, but as oil exports have slumped, the wells have stopped pumping. Bernard Smith reports from Baghdad.
Baghdad's wholesalers need to turn their stock around quickly to stay ahead of rising food prices. For the market labourers earning $7 a day, the basics have become unaffordable. Where am I going to get $2.50 to buy a kilo of tomatoes? Asked Halaf Abid. Fruit wholesaler Sajid Aziz says apples have doubled in price. These Indian bananas came the long way around via Jordan's seaport because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. Iranian truck drivers say they're using smaller vehicles because they fear container trucks might be targeted by missiles. It all puts pressure on prices.
Even these Iranian tomatoes, they have hit $1.60 a kilo, triple the price before the war. We do not have market regulations to control prices, and traders sell at whatever price they want. We're facing a crisis. It is getting worse.
And so Iraqis are holding on to their cash. Business has been very slow this past week, Ali tells us. Oil makes up 90% of Iraq's income, and when the flow of oil is disrupted, that affects state spending, and that filters through to household budgets. Iraqis are also victims of cost-push inflation, and that just means when supply routes are cut off, then the price of basic goods and food surges. A quarter of Iraq's population, more than 10 million people, rely on the state for their incomes as employees, retirees or welfare recipients.
The potatoes are expensive, the eggplants are expensive, everything is expensive. Cooking gas has disappeared, oil has disappeared, everything has disappeared.
Iraq's gas production, a byproduct of oil processing, has slumped, along with the 80% drop in oil exports. For now, the government can draw on tens of billions of dollars in reserves to keep the economy afloat. But if oil revenues don't start flowing again by May, then some economists predict the country will struggle to meet its internal and external financial obligations. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
Let's take a look at what else is happening around the world right now. During the Iran war, Israel approved large-scale land grabs in 34 new illegal settlements across the occupied West Bank. Settler attacks have increased significantly. As Al Jazeera's Noor Odeh reports, this has had a direct effect on Palestinians and how they carry out something as ordinary as driving.
On average, a Palestinian loses about 90 hours every month waiting at one of these Israeli checkpoints. There are about 1,000 of them across the occupied West Bank, which is why the first thing you do if you're a Palestinian needing to go from one city to another is to check the hourly updates on the local radios about the state of the roads, which tell you which checkpoints are open and where the Israeli settlers are attacking. Let's have a listen. Everywhere you go in the occupied West Bank, you see a settlement, usually on a hilltop. In the past 40 days or so, during Israel's war with Iran, the Israeli government approved 34 new illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, and that is an unprecedented number. Now, this means that Palestinian cities and the land on which they stand will shrink even further, and all these Israeli flags and manifestations of the illegal presence of Israeli settlements and settlers will take over more and more of Palestinian space. All of this construction work is done to benefit and service illegal Israeli settlements at the expense of Palestinian villages and towns who lose their land for all of this construction that you can see on the road. And once Israeli settlers establish a presence, the whole area becomes too dangerous for Palestinians to approach. According to human rights organizations, during the month of March, Israeli soldiers and settlers carried out nearly 2,000 separate attacks against Palestinians across the occupied West Bank. The UN says this is not haphazard. There was a pattern of complicity between the Israeli army and settlers aimed at displacing Palestinians and creating ethnic cleansing in the occupied territory. 36,000 Palestinians in 1 year displaced by settler violence alone. Driving on the road in the occupied West Bank, Palestinians don't just brave delays and danger, they also bear witness to how fast their land and horizon are shrinking. Noor Aoudi, Al Jazeera, on the road to Nablus, Palestine.
It is 3 years since the war in Sudan began, a conflict that has created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 34 million people, almost 2 out of every 3, now need humanitarian support. Since the war began, around 14 million people have been displaced from their homes. An estimated 19 million school-aged children without access to education. Nearly 70% of hospitals and health facilities in conflict areas are no longer functioning. And estimates suggest that the war may have killed more than 150,000 people. Well, the violence between Sudan's army and paramilitary rapid support forces in Khartoum has slowed, but that's not the case in other parts of Sudan. As Al Jazeera's Hiba Morgan reports.
These streets in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, were once a battleground between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces. Fighting started in April 2023. That's when the RSF, once part of the military, moved its forces to the capital and the northern city of Merowe and surrounded an army airbase. The marks on buildings here in Khartoum are evidence of the war. 3 years on, life is gradually returning to normal.
The situation is better than what we have lived through the past 3 years. People have returned, shops have opened, markets are working, and we've seen relatives we haven't seen in a long time. And now I'm even back to work.
The RSF occupied large parts of Khartoum at the start of the conflict. Fighting displaced millions and killed tens of thousands of people, though there's no official death toll. This is where some of the fiercest battles took place before the army regained control of Khartoum last year. And although the sounds of gunfire and artillery shelling have been absent in the capital for months, that isn't the case elsewhere in country. The RSF is trying to take control of territories in Blue Nile State in the southeast. The attacks have displaced thousands of people in the region. In the Kordofan region, where most of the recent battles are being fought, the increased use of drones by both sides has led to civilian casualties. And the RSF siege on cities in South Kordofan has led to famine and food shortages. In the western region of Darfur, the RSF's capture of the city of El Fasher in October killed at least 6,000 people in the first 3 days, according to the UN. More than 700 cases of sexual violence have been reported, and thousands of people are still missing. The UN says the fighting in El Fasher and the RSF's conduct bears the hallmarks of genocide. Famine has also been confirmed in parts of Darfur. The war in Sudan has created what aid agencies say is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. As the war enters its fourth year, Sudan is militarily divided. The RSF controls most of the west and southwest. It has set up a government in Darfur, raising fears Sudan could split once again. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
Germany is hosting an international conference to raise funds to help those affected by the war in Sudan, as Dominic Kane reports from Berlin.
In calling this conference, the German hosts are hoping very much to focus the world's attention on the situation in Sudan. Many key international partners are taking part in this, as are representatives of Sudanese civil society, but crucially, the Rapid Support Force and the government. Those two warring sides are not invited here. The Sudanese government has complained vociferously about this conference, saying it shouldn't be taking place, it's not helping the situation. The question is, this is the third time in 3 years that a leading European country has called such a conference. There was a conference in Paris, there was a conference in London. It didn't bring about an end to the violence. What chance is there that it can happen after this conference? We shall wait to see. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says that it's critical for the international community to refocus attention on Sudan and work towards bringing an end to the crisis.
It's extremely important that the attention of the international community is back on Sudan, on this horrific situation. We have just heard the reports. From a human rights perspective, what we have seen over the last 3 years is absolutely horrendous. War crimes, crimes against humanity, people being raped, civilians being killed, civilian infrastructure destroyed. So there is a need for the international community to come together to send a very clear signal to both the RSF and the SAF to stop this horrible war and to get back to the negotiation table and to find a way to transition to civilian rule. That's extremely important, and I hope that the Berlin conference will galvanize the energy around that. It's clear that Sudan has been a forgotten crisis for much too long. As a result, a conference like this, where we expect that significant pledges will be made precisely to respond to the 14 million displaced, to the 21 million who are in food insecurity, to the 10 million children that are out of school, is going to be absolutely critical. So I hope that at the end of the day, we will see very concrete pledges. We will also see very concrete commitments to put an end to this war.
Pope Leo is heading to Cameroon on a 4-day visit after concluding his historic trip to Algeria. The head of the Catholic Church is due to meet with Cameroonian President Paul Biya, the world's oldest head of state, who's led the country for more than 40 years. The Pope's visit comes against a backdrop of conflict between the army and separatists. Migrants in Spain are celebrating the country's approval of a mass amnesty program which could help 500,000 people live and work there legally. This was the Bangladeshi community hailing the move in Barcelona. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the amnesty should help the country's ageing population by harnessing the economic benefits of migrant workers. But opposition parties have called the decision reckless. A new trial is being held into the death of Argentinian football star Diego Maradona, a year after a scandal involving a judge caused the first legal case to collapse. Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo reports from Buenos Aires.
Diego Maradona was a symbol of Argentina. He was 60 years old and recovering from brain surgery at home when he passed away nearly 6 years ago. The medical team in charge of caring for him is standing trial on charges of homicide.
Prosecutors say Maradona received inadequate medical care during the days prior to his death, including that his home care was insufficient for his condition and that all warning signs were ignored about his health.
His neurosurgeons, psychiatrists and nurses are among the accused. The case against them is based on a series of audio clips released by local media. Prosecutors say the medical team isolated Maradona from his family, who wanted to hospitalize him to keep profiting. Beatriz Céspedes came to the courthouse in Buenos Aires to demand justice.
Diego was a feeling, it was endless love. It is what I feel. I think it's important to be here so he can rest in peace.
The medical board that examined Maradona's case found the football star showed, quote, unmistakable signs of prolonged agony. His name generates the same media frenzy in death as it did in life.
The original trial started last year, but it was suspended after one of the judges allowed an illegal camera inside the courtroom to film an unauthorized documentary. She was banned from the Argentinian judiciary for life.
For many, the trial is about closure. Argentinians want to know how one of the country's greatest sports stars was treated at the end of his life. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Our extensive coverage of the ceasefire in the war between the US, Israel and Iran continues with Sarah Heirat in 90 seconds.
The latest news.
We are dealing with an escalated situation as over the past 1-2 weeks we see more and more attacks on the infrastructural areas of the country.
And in-depth reports.
For many people here, Israel is the factor of complication and complexity in this situation. It's the elephant in the room.
From the heart of the story.
The Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Iran has accepted the ceasefire and the Iranian troops will oversee the passage in the Strait of Hormuz.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Diplomacy, yet again, was used as a ruse for war.
Critical debate.
Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? For the third time during the talks we should be attacked? Who is talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran.
Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
Inside